So I'm going to leave the ignition barrel attached to the top yoke. I'm going to carefully fold it over and lie it on top of the clocks, putting my cloth on there first. Removing the top yoke reveals the threaded stem underneath, the top lock nut, the bottom adjuster nut, and the lock washer that's been peened into both top and bottom nuts, effectively tying them together. Bend the top tabs down to release the top nut. It should be tighter than this one, so you'll need to undo it with the correct size C-spanner or a drift and hammer. The fact that this lock nut is doing anything but indicates that someone has been in here fiddling, probably trying to adjust worn bearings. Now you can just lift the lock washer off and throw it away. You should only use these once. Just before I drop the stem out of the headstock, I'm going to remove anything still attached to the bottom yoke. In this case, that's the horn and the brake hose splitter. So now we can drop the bottom yoke and the stem out of the headstock. Now if you've got all your original roller bearings in there and you want to keep them, perhaps just re-grease them, you're going to want to catch them in something because they're going to scatter all over the floor probably. So I'm going to use this large child's toy bucket to do that. And now we're going to remove the final stem nut. Now if you don't have a specialist tool, and let's face it, who has, you're going to need to use a flat-ended punch like this and a hammer. The reason we're not using a chisel is because that will damage the nut. Working away from the tank, gently tap the drift on the adjuster nut. In this case, the nut and cap are one piece. In theory, it shouldn't be too tight, but may be a little seized on the threads, so use some penetrating oil and a wire brush if you need to. This adjuster nut, however, is too tight, and it's probably that over-tightening that has caused the bearings to fail. As soon as it's hand tight, undo the nut with one hand and hold the yoke underneath with the other so that it doesn't fall out of the headstock. If you're struggling to get the dust seal, ball race and bearing off, just slide the stem down so you can get a finger inside and pull them out. You may need to give the stem a tap with your hand or a soft-faced mallet. Don't be tempted to use a metal hammer on top of the stem, as you will damage the threads. Carefully lower the stem and yoke out of the way, taking special care not to damage your radiator if you have one. So now we've got the headstock apart, let's take a look at the various components. Starting with the bottom yoke, it has the stem pressed into it. At the bottom of the stem is the lower dust seal, which keeps out the crap thrown up by the front wheel. Holding that in place is the lower inner ball race, then the ball bearings. In this case they're caged. On top of that goes the lower outer ball race, which is still in the headstock. Then the upper outer ball race, again still in the headstock, the upper set of caged ball bearings, then the upper inner ball race. On top of that is the upper dust seal, the top cap and adjuster nut, in this case one piece, the lock washer and the lock nut. The top yoke sits between the lock nut and the top yoke nut. Clean the old grease off the ball races so you can check the surfaces for wear. If you look closely at the bottom inner ball race, you can see these marks in it. They coincide with each ball bearing and might well be the result of over-tightening, or perhaps too many wheelies. It's those marks that are causing the steering to self-centre, as each ball is forced into its divot because the stem is adjusted too tightly. You can also see corrosion on the top outer ball race, which will give a rough feel to the steering as well.